Hi guys, welcome to the latest podcast of Yarn and Black. Today I've got a great mate of mine coming on called Nathan. Nate, how are you?
Well, thank you, AJ. How are you? Good to
I'm
see you again.
fine. Glad you could pop in. Um,
Yeah, thank
Before I
you.
do start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm currently on. I'm here in Bourbon Q on the land of the Wurundjeri people, and I pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. I'd like to extend that to lands that you're currently on as well, Nate, and pay respect to elders past and present. And also would like to acknowledge you and any other Aboriginal person that joined us today.
Yeah, thank you,
So,
AJ.
guys, welcome, and I might just get Nate to introduce himself. So, Nate, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Nate Frank Riley. I'm a proud Tubba-Gah Maing Wiradjuri man. I'm from Dubbo in New South Wales, born on Darug country in Sydney and currently living back on Darug country and happy to be here. I love it here in this part of Sydney.
Cool. And how long have you been living in Sydney for now?
This stint's probably been about 6 years now, although I did have 2 years in Dubbo during COVID, sort of in between. But even during that time was back and forward a lot until COVID hit.
Yeah. Now, you grew up in Victoria for a while too, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I had some cousins living in Melbourne, which was a bit unusual growing up in Dubbo. Not most people would go to Sydney. If they wanted to go to university or go on a study TAFE. But I chose Sydney. I was invited by my cousin to visit for a 2-week holiday during the school holidays. I think it was the end of year 10. And that was 17 years. I never left. I rang my parents after about a week and I said, can you please pack everything up in a box, chuck it on the bus? I'm not coming home. And I was in Melbourne for a very long time.
Yeah. What did you like about Melbourne?
Yeah, look, I think moving to Melbourne in the sort of late 90s, there was a lot of a live music scene, which I really loved. Coming from a country town, you miss out on a lot of those things as you get into music and bands, and you miss out on a lot. So, of course, the bright city lights and that kind of entertainment scene really attracted me. I also like the community as well. It was very different to growing up in a regional community. There was a lot more for mob available. A lot of different festivals and a lot of different, community events that would run all year round and protests as well. I loved engaging in activism and still do. So that was a massive draw card for me for Melbourne.
Yeah. And did you study uni at Melbourne as well?
When I moved to Melbourne, I initially wanted to become an artist. I actually had a place at Sydney Uni to study fine art, and the condition was I'd finish year 12. I was interviewed, I think, in year 11. But since I decided to go to Melbourne, I didn't have that place at the university. So I actually started studying arts through TAFE at NMIT.
Yeah.
I loved it. However, I got sick of eating pot noodles. I was sick of making pizza out of pita bread. So I needed to go out and get a job. And it was very lucky. My first job was at the Victorian Aboriginal Health Service. I loved it there. But I always was sad that I didn't go back to art. I tried to study a couple of times to help me with careers and found that I wasn't interested in that kind of work. And eventually I did complete a diploma through CACT Design School
Yeah.
in interior design, which I loved. So that was actually the first thing I actually completed and managed to complete, which I was really proud of myself because I just had a history of dropping out, giving up.
The interior design, is this what you've done behind you?
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm always using my design communication skills. They've kind of served me very well in my career. I work a lot I've worked a lot in business development, kind of community development, type of thing. So being able to present to people has always been really important as a trainer as well. So I think even though I practiced as an interior designer for about 6 years, enjoyed it, but ended up going back to community work because I didn't feel like I was fulfilling that need within me to contribute, right? If I was just going to design another white shaker kitchen with a Calcutta marble bench top, I was going to go mad. It wasn't feeding my soul in terms of what I felt I should be focusing on, which were around some of the critical needs we have in the community, which I felt I could you know, create some impact working particularly around mental health and financial inclusion.
Yeah. Now, how did you get into mental health?
I initially got into mental health kind of in a roundabout way. I was working in the superannuation industry, the not-for-profit superannuation industry, and a position was advertised for First Nations Foundation. And I worked for First Nations Foundation in financial literacy and inclusion for, I think I was there for nearly 8 years, a really long time. I loved it there. I loved the people I was working with. And I became very interested in the kind of social and emotional well-being impact that money problems have on people and financial pressures have on people. And there wasn't a lot of research done in that space. So that's why I decided at that point I wanted to work more in the mental health space. And then from there, I started a job working on a Prime Minister and Cabinet program coordinating remote Aboriginal mental health first aid training all throughout Australia. And I love that role. I got to travel a lot. I was very privileged to see so much of Australia. But that role really, for me, really ignited that fire that I had for working in the SEWB space and wanting to do something different in that space.
Yeah. So you became a mental health first aid instructor as well?
I did, yeah, an AEH Aboriginal mental health first aid accredited instructor. I love that training. I think it's, aside from, you know, the health literacy component of it, what I actually love about it is when I'm delivering it to community members. So, you know, not kind of stakeholder level, when it's actually community mob. Sometimes people come in a bit hesitant. Sometimes people come in a bit scared and nervous. But the environment of trust it creates where we can talk openly and honestly about a lot of things that happen to us and people in the community that are quite stigmatized, and we shy away from those conversations. Being able to have an environment where you can have those open, honest conversations, I think is really important towards healing and understanding each other and building rapport and trust, which then creates wonderful collaboration. So I think that the outcomes of a program like that go way beyond the immediate need to provide support in a crisis situation. You know, the benefits really do go on.
Yeah. So you took that, obviously did that across Australia. What communities did you go to? Tell the viewers.
We used to spend, so we would work with 2 communities for up to 2 years. And during that 2 years, we would be in one community for a week, another community for a week, and then have the other 2 weeks of the month at home in Sydney. So I traveled around quite a lot. I've worked in Haste Bluff, Alice Springs, Papunya, Balgo, Wadair. I've traveled all through the Central Desert, you know, getting trapped in sand mountains in 4-wheel drive in the hot desert, and, you know, driving through the kind of tropics of the north end, top end of Australia. And it's very magical there. But it's also an eye-opener as well. It certainly made me appreciate my privilege and be able to actually reflect as an Aboriginal person on my culture and what I was doing. And when I eventually returned to Dubbo for that 2 years, I felt there was so much growth in that period, because being an alien in a community, you know, where there's 10 different languages and English may be the 5th, you understand what questions you need to ask about yourself and your own culture. So when I went back home, I was then ready to receive more cultural information. And then I found out so much more about where I come from than I ever knew before. So I was always very, very lucky, and feel very privileged and blessed for that experience.
Do you think people really know what remote is until you've gone remote?
No, look, I think people can assume what it might be like, and I think sometimes fantasize about what some of the barriers are for people in terms of remoteness. But something we always sort of used to advocate around in the financial inclusion space was, remoteness and location is not the only problem that community members have, or barriers that community members have. And in fact, with almost half of the Aboriginal population, Torres Strait Islander population, being severely financially excluded, like they're people in major metropolitan areas who are socially excluded or financially excluded, or, being left behind, basically. So I think, yeah, I think it's problematic sometimes, because I think policymakers want to create policies and create programs to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in remote communities, but they also make an assumption that we have a lot of support. I work in Western Sydney. It's one of the highest populations of metropolitan Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia. And the lack of service and the lack of policy for services is a surprise, actually, if I'm honest.
Mm.
And I think that's part of the reason why,
Yeah. What do you like about working with community compared to working with organizations?
I think it's changed over time. I think initially it was quite selfish, I think, in a way, because I felt a little bit like it was part of my journey to learn, and be prepared for leadership in the future. We all have to step up. We all have to take leadership obligations seriously, and support our family members, particularly our mothers and community as we get older. So I sort of did it for that reason, I suppose. It wasn't until later on I realized that what I could leave with people was so much more than whatever program I was delivering. And then that became the motivator. It was actually then I realized what I was attracted to working in community was actually the relationships. That was the most important thing. You don't sort of get those or I don't have that same level of relationship with groups that are facilitated that are non-Indigenous. And I think that's just because of the way we are as people and culturally, and it's also trauma informed. But I love that, because some of the people I've trained in the room are now training people, and I've been along that journey with them. I've been there mentoring and supporting them when they've been practice baby trainers. And seeing them grow is amazing. So I just don't think you can replicate that working in mainstream. Yeah.
Yeah. You talked about leadership. What makes a good Aboriginal leader?
Yeah, look, I think I think showing up is really important. I think you always have to show up. All of my elders showed up, even when they were tired, when they were frustrated, even when they knew they weren't going to get the outcome that they wanted from whatever the meaning was, they still showed up. I think a good leader is also somebody who, is open-hearted and honest. And I think is just empathetic and understanding. I think that's number one. I think you have to be a good listener before you can be a good speaker. I think that's something people often forget. You normally see, the best leaders in communities are often very quiet people, often, not the loudest, most boastful people. Mm.
I think that people do forget sometimes that some leaders work from behind. It's like pushing people to be their best without actually dragging them out from the front upwards, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think Western culture has a very kind of defined view towards professional development and career advancement and all of those kind of things, just in a work setting. But I think they still aspire to those attributes in community. I think leadership in the context of the community, our communities, is much different. It's a very different leadership style, actually. Yeah.
And so
It's
you've also
hard to articulate.
you've also got your own business as well.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I've had Nathan Fred Consulting now for, I think almost about 7 years. I started a little bit of independent sort of consulting here and there. I'm working with people, which was fantastic, taking on little extra jobs. And eventually, over time, I created my own content. And I primarily deliver cultural consulting now, which is a bit more of a focus on specific projects. And then I still have a cultural sensitivity training program, which I don't deliver much anymore. But what I have been doing over the last couple of years is working with an organisation called Kurrannula Aboriginal Corporation in Janelli. They're the only Aboriginal organisation in the Sutherland Shire. Auntie Dee Shriver and my auntie Anne Cribb, my mother's sister, set that organisation up over 30 years ago. And they're in aged care and disability support. And I've been working with them over the last couple of years. I provided my content to them, and we've adapted that into a program that they can deliver in community, which is part of a reconciliation action plan from Sutherland Shire Council. I've had great fun over the last couple of years delivering training. I think we must have delivered to about, nearly 1,000 service providers and workers in the Shire. And it's the first time this kind of training's been offered in that part of Sydney. And it's just, the feedback's been really positive. So yeah, I've been really happy that they've been able to take that program on and train some people to deliver that. And now that's an additional income stream for them.
Yeah. Cool. How do you define cultural safety for Aboriginal people or for people that identify as LGBTIQ+?
Yeah. I kind of shy away from the term cultural safety. I kind of feel like the word safety is such an individual, personal thing that I feel like you need to have ownership in your safety. You need to carry your safety. I like the term cultural humility because I think what cultural humility does, it asks people to kind of prescribe to a set of human behaviors, like human leadership behaviors. And one of the defining things of cultural humility is reflective practice. And I think that's really, really important. It's kind of reflecting on my own behavior and my bias, understanding that I'm not the expert in everything, that other people have other different cultures and other different worldviews and belief systems, and I'm just going to be respectful of that. But also that I'm going to be committed to lifelong learning and a journey of lifelong learning. Around my cultural humility, that it's lifelong. And then also the last one is ownership in the colonial narrative. And look, the reason I like cultural humility as a model, because I feel like when we ask people to, when we have a code of conduct in the workplace, like we have a culture in our workplace, we have a code of conduct, and it's really about risk mitigation and protecting the business. And I think often what happens with Aboriginal issues is that's how they're dealt with in a workplace from a risk mitigation perspective or from a legislative perspective. I think cultural humility asks people to be really good people first. And that's why I preference cultural humility.
Do you think there's been a change in people's attitudes around wanting to know more about Aboriginal culture?
Yeah, I absolutely do think there has been. And I love that, but I also feel like it can be quite problematic as well. Certainly around consultations and when it comes to business, right? I think, I kind of reflect back culturally, and I think this is where the worldviews are quite different here. Western's people attitude towards knowledge and data, right, is of one of privilege. That's why there are things like Freedom for Information Act, right? There's that set of values for them, right? If it's there, if you can count it, or if it's out there, it's my right to know about it. On the other hand, our culture operates very differently like that. We don't just send people to school according to how many times the planet revolves around the sun and expect them to be ready. We meet people where they are. So I think we have a real kind of challenge sometimes to try and protect what is culturally secret and sacred and important to us. And then also what information people need to know in order to conduct business. I think they're two very separate things. And I think what often happens is government likes to fund programs that broadly teach everyone about culture, right? They don't like us to fund cultural intervention. And that's what I'm about as a worker and as an academic, as a senior health strategist, is around cultural intervention. So I think we need to have conversations around that. In fact, I know as a result of the referendum, direct leaders have been saying that they wanted to pull the direct curriculum now from TAFE, right? It's like, you want to say no? Well, we're not going to teach your kids language anymore. And I think it's our right to do that. We have to be very protective of our sovereign right and of our culture and you know, making sure that it's directed at the future, which is our children, not worrying about including everyone else, because we've been welcoming for nearly 300 years, and you know what? We've never been acknowledged. And that's the truth.
Yeah.
That's the actual truth. So I created hashtag no more welcomes, hashtag new acknowledgements. And I've stopped acknowledgement. Like, I've stopped doing the acknowledgement of country in that kind of formal, traditional way. I actually go around the room and I ask each individual to perform an acknowledgement in space. And I point to the non-Indigenous people first. It's their time now.
And I think that's a great idea. I think that's a fantastic model. Yeah. What about issues for LGBTIQ plus? How are they being accepted or welcomed into workplaces and into communities you work with?
It's very difficult, I know, particularly for trans people within our community. And, you know, Sydney is kind of like this hive for people, for mob particularly, you know, coming from all around Australia that sit somewhere in the queer rainbow to find family, you know, and sometimes they're fleeing discrimination. They might be fleeing things like, you know, religious kind of bias in their communities and all these kind of things, right? But unfortunately, you know, sometimes they don't see the kind of level of support that's needed around things like housing, around accessing services, around, you know, specific safe mental health services and health services to access. And there's so much money in that space. So I really don't understand why yeah, there actually isn't a lot more support for a lot of those problems. I think mental health is a serious problem, and housing insecurity is another massive one as well, for mob in the community, aside from all of the other things that they have to deal with just being a member of the queer community and being mob.
Yeah. What would you like to see different occur?
I would
if I gave you a magic wand and zillions of dollars.
Yeah. I think what I would like to see is treaty. I think it would be pay for the stolen land. It's time. And look, I think a lot of people might find that very provocative. However, to me, it just makes the best sense. New South Wales spends $48 million a year. We have the largest share in closing the gap. The government's, you know, at all levels has made a substantial commitment of $481 million towards closing the gap. And unfortunately, in every measure, it's going backwards almost, apart from education. What I would like to see is that money being actually spent on the community, because we know it's not coming to community. It's not going towards Aboriginal community controlled sector. You know, actually, all of the work that we've put in overperforming for the last 30 years across health, across education, to have all of these improvements, that work's now being undone, I feel. You know, the sustainability around the income for the Aboriginal community controlled sector is an absolute disgrace. Capo has been saying clearly now for the last 5 years, I do not know why government is still sitting on it. Like, it's time for that money to go out. Treasury in New South Wales produced a report a couple of years ago, an Indigenous expenditure report, that found 80% of that $48 million in New South Wales was going to unidentified, untargeted programs. That means they couldn't track that money and tell you where it was going or if it had any impact, right? We cannot continue to spend $48 million a year for nothing, right? We would be better to divide that $48 million a year up between every single Aboriginal person and, mind you, start handing back housing commission homes or government homes. If an Aboriginal person is living in a housing commission home, they should have that deed and title, right? And then you don't have to worry about the long-term health for that family, because all of a sudden we will be granted the only privilege that's been really taken away from us, and that is the opportunity to earn intergenerational wealth off our own land. That is the one thing that everybody else in this country has that we've never been entitled to, right? And we can draw a line in the sand all we want. We can get over it. We can do all of the resilience training we want to be resilient people. But at the end of the day, you know, there are so many people in community that are in such desperate situations, such hopeless situations, to own a home, to own a piece of country. In the long term, that would do so much more for them in compensating that intergenerational trauma and all of that hurt. And their children wouldn't have to suffer as badly, you know, and wouldn't be dying at 38. You know, so to me, it makes perfect sense. You know, we need to start spending the money in real areas that create real change for real people. And treaty, I think, is certainly an avenue towards that. And I think reparations is also an avenue towards that. And that has happened because that was the Noongar Native Title Settlement, was basically a reparations compensations payment for the land that was stolen.
Yeah. With all your travels, have you seen any place or any org that's doing it really well working with Aboriginal people?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Luigi Institute. I love the type of research that they do. I think they were early pioneers in community-led research. And I think some of the kind of research things that they've done have been fantastic. One of those, oh, I hope I get this right. I believe it was Papanya, and they had a women's camp. They took all of the older women out country and they went out to one of the outstations and they camped there for a couple of weeks and created this beautiful artwork. And what the artwork actually represented was their suicide action plan for the community. And it was a process that was pre-workshop. So they had, like, they did the Western thing, right, to find out what all of the contributing factors were and what it kind of looked like, that triage looked like. But then they created this beautiful artwork that went on the community hub. So it was in a really prominent place in the community. But what it meant was every time somebody was in crisis in that community had a plan in place. And it was done in such a discreet way. It was done in such a cultural way. I refer to that as cultural centrality. You know, when culture is really the central component, the central idea and theme of what we're doing. And I think that kind of works great. And that's the type of stuff that needs to happen more. Community have the solutions. We know local decision-making is empowering. We know we can't empower people. That's racist and paternalistic. We need to acknowledge community strengths, community evidence, community knowledge, and community power. And I think that's a really great way of doing that.
Yeah. We've talked a lot of business stuff, but I want to swap to another side. You mentioned that you're very artistic. Tell us a little bit about your artistic flares.
Yeah, I suppose these days I've started to consider myself a bit of a multidisciplined artist. I started out pretty traditionally with paints when I was younger, and very much loved abstract kind of works and very heavy saturated works. And I think that's why I sort of went into interior design and that kind of graphics design space a little bit, inspired by, this kind of clean architectural lines and stuff like that, modern design. And then I think about maybe, 8 years ago, I picked up a paintbrush after a really long time of not painting and being quite scared of, putting myself out there as an artist. And I just started painting studies to practice. That was while I was still traveling around a lot, and just being in communities like Papunya and seeing like my icon, like Doris Bush, one of my famous artists, like in the middle of the desert, like just when I just had to start painting again. And then it's sort of taken on from there. So now there's Gemini and I paint my face, and it's gone into performance art. But then also I want to dabble with some light and projection and interactive social art as well. So it is very much evolving. One of my favorite projects that I worked on actually was a project in Dubbo for the local land service. And what it was actually was a program around sort of showing government agencies and showing businesses in Dubbo that you can do things with Indigenous procurement. And there was lots of talent out there. And what we actually did was created an Indigenous place. And it's the first Indigenous place in Dubbo. And I got to collaborate with my cousin, Mindy Fennell, who's an incredible muralist, who designed this incredible 20-meter mural of the Warrnambool River at sunset, which featured our traditional foods like quandongs and things like that, bush apricots. But then every single plant was actually, a significant cultural plant, whether it was used for tools, whether it was used as a food source or for art or for ceremony. And then on that project, we achieved 98% like Indigenous procurement, including all of the plants. So working with all different local, Indigenous businesses, and the result was spectacular. It looks fantastic. It's a great learning tool, and just the collaboration, it helped me grow as an artist. It helped me grow as a person as well. So yeah, that was the beginning of the fear starting to peel away for me as an artist and being able to push myself outside of my comfort zone. And yeah, now I'm like ready to drop death kick on stage with pop stars. We'll see what's coming in the future.
Immediate plans that you've got?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, lots going on actually. So I'm working at the moment. I'm working on a little bit of a collaboration project with other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander queer performers, so like drag queens and trans girls. And what we're doing is putting together a set of promotional cards, hopefully for Mardi Gras, and doing a bit of a photo shoot with two really fantastic photographers who I won't name until it's all like lock and key. Yeah. But what we're doing, inspired by tarot cards, we're going to produce a set of dreaming cards because all of us are from different countries, and we're going to tell a dreaming story or a kind of creative dreaming story around our characters, and share some cultural knowledge and how that's incorporated in our performance. So I'm very excited about that. I've got an artwork appearing in my partner Stevie Lindsay Ross's exhibition, My Black Sovereign Body, which is going to be, that's always at the start of Mardi Gras. So keep an eye out for that. And then more podcast stuff. So I've got a podcast series coming up. I'm filming next week with a wonderful guest. I won't give it away now, but another Sydney Queen. And the series is called Out on the Lenai. So it's a little interview series, a little talent segment series, a little kiki out on the back. It's going to be heaps of fun. And I have plans for that one to also go live on location on a Friday and Saturday night. On the drag scenes around Sydney, and who knows, maybe even Melbourne one day. Also keep an eye out for local shows as well. So I'll be hopefully doing some local shows and putting out a bit of a schedule on social soon as well.
Yeah. So what's it called? On the Lanai?
On the Lenai, yeah. So a little
I
bit of a
was just
golden.
watching last night the Golden Girls, and
Yes, exactly.
Blanche's lanai was at the back of her house, like the back patio, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That's the Lenai. And it's my favorite place in the backyard here in North Parramatta. And yeah, I don't know, I like that space. My ancestral totem is a sulfur-crested cockatoo. And when we do business on country, or when we have meetings, or when we do ceremony, there is this constant thing that happens. And if we do good, our ancestors do a bit of a flyover. But when we moved in here, because my partner was here before, the first morning, early in the morning, because I get up at like 5 o'clock, there was a whole family of sulfur-crested cockatoos, and they sit above the power line in my backyard out on the lanai. So it's become a really special place for me. I feel like my ancestors are there. They're watching what I'm doing. They're happy about what I'm doing. They're encouraging me. There's so much woven about my culture, my spirituality, what I've learned through business, what I've learned through academia, and how I've kind of, sort of modeled that through our cultural lens. And that kind of informs Gemini's work, it informs Nate's work. It's all sort of beautifully interwoven. So I feel very blessed. I have so many of my ancestors standing behind me, and just very blessed for the leadership in my family. I mean, a lot of my family members have achieved amazing things. My cousin Lynette Riley, is has an Order of Australia. Michael Riley is a famous international artist. My grandfather was a famous black trucker. So like I have big shoes to fill. I feel like there's pressure there, but I also feel very blessed to have these kind of iconic standout people
Yeah.
in community. We're very blessed to have had these stories. It's we're very lucky. It's created all of this rich history around who we are as tailors from Dubbo. Every traditional owner from Dubbo comes from 5 siblings, the Taylors.
Yeah.
And yeah, that all of our kind of journey then starts from there. I'm very proud of the dust I come from. Yeah, very, very proud of. In fact, one of my friends gave me a new hashtag, which was hashtag red dust legs. So shout out to all the red dust legs out there in the Central West, red dust country.
So you mentioned Stevie before.
Yeah.
How long have you guys been together?
So,
And
yeah.
how long did how did you guys meet?
Yeah. Stevie and I have been together now for a year. We would laugh about that because it started out as a summer fling. We met each other actually through the First Nations Mardi Gras workshops last year, which was a fantastic experience. I never thought I would participate in a Mardi Gras parade, actually. I never thought I would ever do anything like that. I thought it was too shame job. And I loved being part of that. Those community workshops, we met, I think something like 11 times and built that together. And yeah, Stevie was very lucky. He was able to participate in those. He was actually one of the judges for the parade. So actually had to get special permission to attend the workshops, obviously because, they didn't want it to be any kind of bias when it came to voting decisions. But yeah, we met at that workshop and it was love at first sight. Yeah.
Cool. Pets, kids?
Yeah, 2 pets. So Stevie has a tabby cat named Hajibu. Who's a very interesting cat. He's very split personality, which I think is very appropriate because Stevie and I are both Geminis. Born very close together. I'm the 23rd, he's the 25th. So there's 4 people in this house all the time. So Hajibu's a cat. I also had a new puppy actually when I first met Stevie. So it was beautiful. We were able to raise Jeddah. together. I don't know if you
Wow.
see that up there. There's a beautiful Jeddah
Yep.
movie poster there. And Jeddah is a just recently turned 1-year-old American Staffy cross bull Arab. So on the scale of height, there's one here and one up here. And they're still learning to get along. We've been living together now, I think, for about 3 months, and it's improving. But we all know about the relationship between cats and dogs, eh?
Do you think the relationship between cats and dogs are worse than siblings, or siblings worse
I
than
think
cats and
very
dogs?
similar, actually. Very similar. I had a kind of interesting relationship with my siblings because we're a bit like the Brady Bunch. So my mum was married before and had children. So that's my siblings. Ruth, well, Trevor's the first, then my sister Ruth, and then Rebecca, who passed away about 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And then on my dad's side, there's Anthony, and I'm the only one from the current relationship. So my brother Trevor, is nearly 60 now, and I'm 40. So there's also quite a big gap. And we all didn't live in a house together, raised as kids. There was a bit of a crossover, but not much. So yeah, I wish I knew more about. I often, as a kid, used to think, oh, I wish I had a sibling around my own age. But I was very lucky. Mum's the eldest of 8. We biggest mob. Shout out to all the Taylors, Riley, Smiths, Doolan bands like of Dubbo, and all the Peak Hill mob too that are related. And Wello Mob and all of us in Sydney. I was very lucky. I was always surrounded by cousins my own age. And even though I never had a lot of friends growing up, I was always very lucky to have big mob around me. And in fact, when I used to get into trouble and when I used to get bullied and stuff, I remember when I first started high school, I got pushed around by some white senior boys, and they got attacked by a big mob of, must have been 40 of the boys from around town that went to school. I was not physically touched again.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. I think, that's how we operate as mob and with one another. We can be different. I can be queer. I can have a very different lifestyle. And, there might be a lot of mob that might not be able to relate to me on that level. But when we get together, we are so similar and we always look out for one another. And we are always so blessed to be a part of that. Community is so important. Being surrounded by community, having that circle of love, so important. It's the key to happiness, a long life, and it's the key to looking like this at 40.
You look fabulous for 40.
Thank you.
How old were you when you came out to your family and friends?
I think it's a lot of my family, like my nan would say, I was gay coming out of the womb. It's quite interesting. I think
Was it a big production? Did you have a huge number coming
yeah,
out?
exactly, like full production, face tuned and everything on straight onto TikTok. No, yeah, look, I think it was really interesting. I didn't actually officially come out to my parents till I was in my 20s. My first gay relationship was actually at 15. So I had a partner from 15 till I left to move to Melbourne very young. And I was known in community. I guess the thing was though, I never really did have a chance to actually do any real reflection on it. And then I actually realized at 38 years old that I'm not gay, I'm pansexual, I'm also polyamorous, and I'm also don't now identify as male or female. I kind of move and sway from anything in between to nothing. And I think most people might find that weird, and there's a lot of kind of aggressive conversations and dialogue going on around that. But I think it was really important to me, and that kind of sat with me and held me back and made me sad for a lot in my life. And even still now, people just think, oh, you're a gay man, but I'm absolutely not. Like, I don't identify as that at all. So now queer is just the best term that I use. But I feel really empowered now because I live a very authentic life and I talk very openly about it, and people can judge me all they want. I don't really care. People's problems with me are not my problems. That's their problems, to quote Azalea Banks, who I love. And I've just learned to just, if I'm being my authentic self, I might lose people around me because that's been the experience. You know, I've had to say goodbye to some people, and some people that have been friends since childhood. Um, because you know what? Like, not everybody that's in your circle, not everybody that is around you is there for the right purpose, and they also don't serve you well. They always don't serve you well. So I think it's very sensible and it's very kind to yourself to do a relationship stock take, right? To think about what kind of people I want to invest my time in, you know, and stop just giving out all the time. Because that's what I was doing. I was give all the time to everybody. But so many people take that for granted and take that for advantage. And as soon as you want to start claiming space for yourself, if it doesn't fit within their kind of view of what they wanted for you, well, you know, then they don't like you all of a sudden. I think it takes strength and courage to do that. And yeah, I'm a huge advocate for it. The people I have surrounding me now are the most beautiful friends I've had in my life. I had a 40 years birthday, big milestone birthday this year. Um, and I'm just trying to think, there was not one single friend really there from my very distant past.
Mm.
But the people that came to my party and the people that were there, like my friend Kim drove all the way from Dubbo that day to spend time with me and the bunch of people that she'd never even met. You know,
Yeah.
so yeah, that day was just really reaffirming for me that friendships and relationships are so important. They take work, honor them. You know, when you honor them, you are actually honoring yourself. um, Being selfish is not a bad thing. Being selfish is a really important thing sometimes, as long as it's, you know, as long as it's got good intent behind it.
Do you think some people struggle with the constructs around gender identity in 2023, 24 coming up?
Absolutely. I think it's really encouraging that there's more of an open dialogue about it. I think what I've kind of feel Australia has a problem with things like logical fallacies, and we have a problem with gaslighting. So I think often in this country, when we try and create platforms for people to talk about their experience, often what happens is people want to attack them and start minimizing that experience, and then use logical fallacies to just basically discredit their experience and confuse them. And I see that happening a lot in conversations around gender and identity. I also see that in conversations around identity, race politics. I think they're the two biggest things that we really need to start really talking about in this country, because I actually think there's a lot of harm being caused. I meet, you know, since this social media journey, so many people reach out to me, so many people that are struggling, all different types of things, all different issues around their gender, their identity, particularly from mob, particularly from people of color. Because, you know, like, when you're a person of color, like regardless of being Aboriginal, regardless of being First Nations, when you're a person of color, you're struggling all the time. You're always in survival mode. It's actually a luxury to think about your gender. And I know for me, what I was projecting out in the world was, don't look at me, don't draw too much attention towards myself.
Mm.
So it's actually very hard to reflect and then play with gender. Um, you know, you have to do those things. You know, it wasn't until my face was painted that I realized that, hey, maybe I'm not a man. Maybe I'm not just a cis gay man. Maybe there's something else more than this. You know, I already knew I was pansexual and attracted to women. I knew that my whole entire life. But it was tricky to navigate that because I never got the opportunities to really have relationships with women. And in fact, the times I did have relationships with women were secret because they didn't want to draw the attention to being with the guy that's just come out of a relationship with another guy, you know. So yeah, look, you know, people's experience matter. That's what we need to center our storytelling on. That's what I like to do with my work, is I want to elevate voices in community that have these experiences, create these dialogues, and create space for people along any point of their journey to engage in it in safe ways, in productive ways, in helpful ways.
Yeah, beautiful. Hey, mate, I'm just watching the time. I've got a final question for you, and that is, what would you like people to walk away with from our yarn this afternoon?
Yeah, I think what I would like people to walk away from some of the things that we've talked about today is I would actually like to leave them a bit of a tool, one, and that is Didiri. And there's a fantastic video. Dr. Miriam Rose, who is just an expert practitioner of Didiri, has a wonderful film. But there is a 3 little clip on YouTube available that talks about the concept of Didiri from Daly River people's perspective. And that saved me, it changed my life. If you can engage in it, take 15 minutes a week, take 15 minutes a day, go out to country. Doesn't matter what background you come from. Country nurtures all of us. We all need it to survive. That is a relationship. Yeah, because I think for Aboriginal culture, the 2 things, I think the 2 values in our culture that are most important are experience and relationship. And relationality. And relationality doesn't just mean my relationships with fellow human beings, it means my relationship to everything, and that includes country. So when you think about country, you should be thinking about rock, stone, grass, dirt. You need to also be thinking about animals, humans, all of us, community, because that's what you should be acknowledging.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thanks, Nate, for that. Hey, guys, I've come to the end of the podcast. I want to go thank you, Nate, for joining us today. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Please say hi to Gemini for us
Will do.
next time he's around.
Will do.
And guys, I'll see you at the next podcast.
Thanks, AJ. It's been so much fun.